Welcome back to the second hour of the show. We just heard about the crisis unfolding in northern Mozambique in our hashtag Africa Focus feature. But another example of how instability is one part of Africa often sends shockwaves across the region. And now we'll be bringing it a bit closer to home because right here in South Africa, a different kind of crisis is brewing, and one that's quietly been building for years. And this time, it's not about bombs or bullets, but the skyrocketing cost of electricity. Electricity prices in South Africa are climbing at a rate some experts are calling insane. And it's not just poor communities anymore. The middle class is also starting to buckle under the pressure. And we'll be joined by Professor Sinwell, a sociologist from the University of Johannesburg. And we'll be unpacking if whether or not the government chooses to respond the right way to this looming crisis and this cost of living that has gotten out of hand, we could be staring down the barrel of widespread social unrest. We also saw the scenes of Tembisa a few weeks ago. Could that be a warning shot? Professor Sinwell now joins us to explain why this is more than just an affordability issue, but it's about access, even about race, and the government putting profits before people. Professor, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to News and Views. Really appreciate you giving us your time this morning.
Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Prof, let's talk about your analysis of the current moment right now here in South Africa. When you look at the rising cost of living, majority of the population becoming increasingly impatient, could we be staring at the barrel of social instability?
That's a very good question. So I think already we assume that when there's no protests going on and people aren't occupying the streets, burning tires, preventing traffic from going on, there's no property being destroyed in some cases. We assume then that there is a level of stability, like you're saying, or you could call it assuming that there is an equilibrium. But an alternative perspective looks at what is bubbling beneath the surface as a result, in part, of the inequalities that are being reproduced in the post-apartheid context. The World Bank calls South Africa literally the most unequal country in the world. And in the post-apartheid period, post-1994, inequality has in fact deepened. And that has largely been the result of the shift away from state driven reconstruction and development program that was promised by the incoming government at the time, the ANC in 1994, the shift from that state-driven approach to the economic, profit-driven, market-oriented cost recovery and privatization that we've seen. So we've had protests over a long period of time. Once people have tried the official channels and they no longer feel that they can access any kind of decision making, and there's an economic crisis like there is right now. But that crisis has been in communities since at least the late 1990s. There's been protests around electricity. And then, of course, we saw also protests and work stoppages in Marikana during Fees Must Fall as well, and in communities. So there's actually a triple-pronged wave of protest that is arguably lying beneath the surface, but it doesn't mean that communities are dormant.
And I think that's very, very important to note. And you almost encroached onto my next question about, this threat. How immediate is it? Is it something we could see like in the near future, or it's something to consider a slow burn kind of crisis?
That's another good question. I think it is a slow burn, but I don't view it necessarily from the perspective that the team of research that we've looked at this necessarily entirely as a threat. An alternative perspective looks at sometimes the promise because community-based organizations and for example, workers' committees, independent organizations that represent communities in a democratic fashion often, those actually might provide alternative ways of looking at reconstructing policies that have been exclusive of ordinary people. But by the nature of the protests and to the extent that it represents mass base, it may actually provide an alternative form of democracy and perhaps
Mm,
even suggest different ways in which society might be organized or resources might be organized to serve not an elite few, under representative democracy, but a majority under a participatory democracy. So these protests are also a call for deepening of democracy.
mm, and something that's very, very important. I want to touch on a point that you've alluded to a few times. A neoliberal, market-driven attitude when it comes to the government's policy. If you can just break that for our listeners, what does it mean in real, felt, literal terms?
It's a really good question. So it means that instead of basic services being provided subsidized or for free by the state, which is required for any kind of decolonization or transformation to take place, which witnessed affirmative action. Apartheid and colonialism witnessed affirmative action on the basis of having white skin.
Mm,
Um, there was affirmative action where you could get jobs and go to school and be promoted only on the basis of white skin. And if your skin was darker, it was expected that you would do menial labor and you would unlikely have any generational wealth to pass on. So that ideology is important because privatization then assumes that we are living in a so-called post-racial society and that everyone is operating like on equal grounds, when in fact, if wealth has been inherited and privileges have been inherited over a very long period of time, dating back, since especially the arrival of European colonialists on the shores of the African continent. If we take those historical inequalities seriously and look at how wealth has accumulated in the hands of the few on the basis of race,
mm,
then the market oriented approach, like willing buyer, willing seller of land, for example, is not going to resolve the issue of land because it just means that land will be more expensive, like more decent land that you can farm upon or that is around good schools and next to good jobs will be more expensive. So even the RDP houses, which are kind of like they were the flagship approach of the ANC that was not reliant only on the market. It became embedded within neoliberal market oriented
mm,
policies because of the willing buyer, privatization, market oriented. So the same thing with electricity. If you assume that everyone is on equal grounds, then you will all pay the same amount. There will be no free electricity for anyone. And then those people who are making literally, 2,000 rands per month, however they get that, they have to pay the same amount for electricity, which means they pay, uh, maybe they could even pay half or a quarter of their income, whereas someone who's making, like, let's say just 20,000, and there are people making hundreds of thousands and millions, like the
Mm,
vast inequality. That person who's making 20,000 will only spend 5%. You won't find that there will be any decolonization or possibility for transformation under a market driven neoliberal economy.
mm, mm. And how would you say that's different from just general inequality, energy racism that you have alluded to?
Not sure about the question. Sorry, what's the
Um,
question?
so energy racism, and how it manifests itself. How would it be different from just general inequality that you've alluded to? That South Africa is the most unequal country in the world at the moment.
Yeah, so energy racism, the reason why it's different is because it combines an analysis of race and an analysis of class. And then the fact of the matter is that it's not only an economic exclusion that is taking place when people can't access electricity, because that term refers to what happened in the past when Black indigenous people were the ones who were actually digging out the coal to produce the electricity for the mines and for white areas. Now that's still to some extent the case, but Black communities, who were systematically excluded from accessing the grids. It is virtually only Black communities in townships, informal settlements, and in villages who are experiencing systematic exclusion on the basis of what ESCOM calls load reduction, which
Mm,
penalizes as a blanket. It's different from load shedding. Load reduction penalizes specific areas like Alexandra, Soweto, Tembisa, always working class Black areas who can't afford to pay. So the fact that people can't afford to pay obviously is rooted in apartheid and colonialism, but it takes on a racial kind of feature because it only affects Black people, and hence we call it energy racism. It discriminates on the basis of your
definitely.
skin.
No, Prof, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate you giving us your time and for those wonderful insights. I think, yeah, it is something very, very concerning and a warning shot to those that are in power to, I don't know, react somewhat. But looking at how things have been going on and the trajectory of our government's responses, they'll definitely wait for something to burn before they do something about it. That was Professor Luke Sinwell from the University of Johannesburg, and his message is clear. When people can't afford to power their homes, they will power their rage instead. And perhaps maybe electricity is just a spark, in a country already burdened by inequality, unemployment has spiraled out of control, and there's been numerous broken promises by the government of the day. Maybe the ground is fertile and electricity is just the seed that's going to make sure that everything gets out of control. So, yeah, really interesting times ahead. You're still listening to News and Views with me, Salailo Makwidiri. We're going to take a short break, but coming up next, we'll be talking to Refilo Mofokeng. We're going to talk about storytelling, we'll be talking about justice, and standing in solidarity with Gaza. More on that after this.